contributors and colleagues, particularly colleagues from creative writing. You are very welcome to the Atrium area here at the University of Limerick for the launch of April is the Cruellest Month. The broadsheet takes T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland as its inspiration. Published 100 years ago, Eliot's ultimately hopeful poem acknowledges head-on the sheer brutality of the modern world. The Wasteland serves to remind us that poetry offers a space to dare, to be creative, to be imaginative, to question the status quo, to be critical and to be radical. While any curation is by definition subjective, the poems contained in this publication do all of these things. The broadsheet contains work by both long established and newly emerging writers and artists that I admire. I'm particularly pleased to include work by Wilsie Casey and Denise Chyla. And of course, Denise Chyla has other things to be doing today, supporting Ed Sheeran in Cork, and she sends her best to all of you. So I thank all of the contributors for trusting me with their work, and I think in setting out on our event today, I just want to stress that a century after Eliot's poem The Wasteland, we need poetry more than ever in our lives. So I'm going to call upon, first of all, Dominic Taylor briefly from the Limerick Writers Centre, who is going to talk about the project, and then my good friend and colleague, long-time friend, Professor Sarah Moore, novelist and buddy, is going to launch the broadsheet itself, and then we will have some readings from some of the contributors. And do feel free to work away with the teas and coffees that are here to my left, particularly the MA students, whom I know have no money. So, Dominic Taylor from the Limerick Writers Centre, thank you.
Thanks, Eoin. Just let me say a word of thanks to the UL Concert Hall and the staff for hosting us here today, and also to Professor Eoin Devereux for suggesting the project as an April is Poetry Month in Limerick event, and his enormous endeavour curating the broadsheet, and all the poets who submitted their work for inclusion. We're delighted that the event is a part of National Poetry Day, which is a celebration of poetry. And poetry has always played an important part of the Limerick Writers Centre programme of events. The centre grew out of the White House Poetry Revival series, began by the late Barney Sheehan in 2003, who was reviving the readings began by poet Desmond O'Grady in 1954, also in the White House bar. Since the Limerick Writers Centre was founded in 2008, we have always kept in touch with those roots. The playwright John Millington Synge said that poetry must have roots among the clay and soil. We believe that poetry, like all cultural activities, enhances and enriches people's lives and has the potential to affect every aspect of life, especially pride and development in our communities. And what better way than poetry to express our humanity? Every person's creative output, whether that is through poetry, novel, memoir, or song, matters, and does, as Seamus Heaney suggests, function as bearers of value. One of the most satisfying and indeed successful ventures of the Limerick Writers Centre has been our community publishing programme. Over the past 14 years, we have published 126 titles, the majority of them poetry collections. The publication we are launching here this afternoon, the Limerick Broadsheet April is the Cruellest Month, is the new departure in publishing for us, but it is also a revival of a format that was published in Limerick by the poet Hayden Murphy from 1967 to 1978, and again by the Limerick Poetry Workshop Group in the late 80s and early 90s with editor Kieran. The title of our broadsheet, April is the Cruellest Month, is taken from T.S. Eliot's great modernist masterpiece, The Wasteland, published in 1922. The Wasteland was the most revolutionary poem of its time, offering a devastating vision of modern civilization between the two world wars. Our broadsheet may not have the same revolutionary impact, but it's nevertheless evidence that poetry is one of the best ways to understand ourselves and our times. As I said earlier, we work in the clay and soil of our communities, and I'm delighted that today we have forged a new link with the University of Limerick and its literary communities. I believe that through the eyes of the poets within this broadsheet, we're entering into truth and beauty of poets' dreams, desires, disappointments. These often hidden things are best said through poetry. The writer Henry Miller has said, "Art teaches nothing but the meaning of life." Poetry can also help us find that meaning in our own individual lives. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dominic. So now Professor Sarah Moore will launch the broadsheet. Sarah.
Hello everybody, it's lovely to see our MA students here and colleagues and friends and poets and writers joining to celebrate this absolutely extraordinary collection. You know, I think it's very clever that this is called, given the title that it's been given, April is the Cruellest Month. Because one of the functions of poetry is to tell the truth about some of the things that we don't always look at. And Owen and I have often talked about this concept called toxic positivity, this idea, especially perhaps this time of year, where everything is great, the sun is shining, and you know, we're all supposed to be really happy. And T.S. Eliot reminds us in that poem that, you know, lilacs are coming out of the dead land, and there's this terrible mix of memory and desire, which is a kind of grief, you know, and I think anyone who reads that poem will have access to the deeper part of what this time of year often triggers in us, and will feel seen and understood in a way that the toxic, cheerful, positive brigade don't always allow us to do. There's nothing wrong with being positive, you know, but the idea of being positive because you've looked into the dark and you've somehow accepted it rather than because you're ignoring it, that's a really important difference. And I think that's this collection is reaching for that and pointing to that and giving us all permission, you know, not to be relentlessly positive all the time, because being human is so difficult and it's so full of suffering and sadness and wrongdoing, you know, and pain and fear, and often those things happen behind closed doors. We don't feel permitted to show those things, and we must in trusting environments, but also the lightning rod of poetry that allows us to feel those things, that allows us to sit with, as Emily and I were talking earlier about, just sit with something, allow yourself feel something. Don't be jollied along by the kind of brigade who don't want to see suffering, because if we don't understand it, if we don't look at it, then we're never going to come to terms with it. And I think there's so much in this collection that really speaks to those ideas. So I am delighted to be launching something that can only be described as a gift for those reasons and for more. It's curated by our own very wonderful Professor Eoin Devereux. It's just a measure of his inexhaustible capacity and commitment for collaboration and creativity, that he has been the lighthouse and the instigator behind this wonderful collection, along with great collaboration, as you've just seen from Dominic and then from all the poets and everyone involved. And there really is a superb diversity of creative voices, of poets and poems who teach us so much, and both Owen and Dominic have touched on this. You know, poems and poets show us how attention to detail is a sacred thing. They provide us something outside the public world, unencumbered by the strictures of ego and self. They build our imaginations. They show us what is really true of human nature. They help us to face our demons, or as Heaney famously put it, they set the darkness echoing. And the echoes are here in this collection like ripples in a pool. They're going to resonate with me for a long time. You know, it's a magnificent distillation. Of course, the beauty of poetry is that everyone who reads these poems will get something slightly different. It'll glance off their own experience in different ways. And then each of us, when we go back to each of those poems again, next year or maybe the year after, we might see something different, like the way a diamond glints and sheds light in different ways and in different spaces. But, you know, so I love that idea about poems, that we unfold their depths gradually, that we don't have to understand it all in one go. And for those of you who are open to poetry and don't quite get poetry, just be patient with yourself. You don't have to understand it all. You don't have to, there doesn't have to be an analysis afterwards or an answer or a solution. There are no niche kind of mechanisms for summarising, and that's the beauty of them. And it's something that's taken me a long time to learn, but I've learned from a lot of the poets in my life to just be patient, to let it sit in the same way as perhaps we let the negative emotions and our fears and griefs sit as well. So in this, we're going to mention each of them separately. I know Eoin is going to take you through their biographies in slightly more detail in a minute. But just in terms of the work, Willsey has reminded me how hope is something we hold on to, but how we still have so far to go. Denise Chila's wonderful piece has held up many cruel truths about the experience of women in the world. I will scream until my voice bleeds, she says in the poem. This is such a powerful line and shows how much it takes often to speak the truth. Martin Dyer's lyricism, of course, is always a joy. I can't get one particular line out of my head. Cold faith in nuance dogs these milk-bound boughs. Oh my goodness, it's just so distilled and full of depth and cleverness and richness and complexity. John Liddy's philosophical meditation is a joy, pointing in his own words to the mystery in every one of us. Imelda Maguire, who I met earlier, articulates the tragedy in all of us, that we humans only have one spring, we only have one summer, and that's part of the grief that we all need to process about our lives. Emily, our beloved poet in residence, who's done so much to enrich our students' learning and our own learning in her colleagues in creative writing and beyond, brings us a completely new understanding of Galway rain, how once it contained our longings. That just seems very deep and very true and very heartfelt. Donal Ryan, whose poem I Saw You does what Donal's writing always does, by giving back to someone their dignity and their humanity. Jo Slade, whose last words from She Walked to the Lindens are just so affecting. My kin, my darling, my ancient one. Kerry O'Brien's image of facing the light for the first time will also stay with me, as will Kieran Beville's poem The Lesson, which in 21 lines gives us one of the best depictions of love and heroism that I think I've ever read. And Eoin, our darling Owen's own poem, which with lyricism and with grace and with humour deals with the pain and fury of how it feels to be stereotyped and marginalised. Everybody needs a copy of this extraordinary broadsheet. I love the way it's been produced, its colours, the tree, the way it folds up like a map, because of course it is a map. Equipment for living, instructions for being human, directions pointing us towards the essential ingredients of the human heart. I'm proud of my colleague and friend Eoin Devereux for the soulful work that created this lovely collection, and of all of the poets who have made it what it is. And I'm proud, officially, to declare this Limerick Broadsheet April is a Cruel Month officially launched.
I thought you didn't like positivity. So we'll have some readings then, and we start with our Maskell UL 50 poet in residence, Emily Cullen. And Emily has joined us on the creative writing faculty here at UL, and even in a short space of time, the last couple of months, she's been so impactful on our master's students and on the campus community. Today there are some espresso poems available on YouTube from some of Emily's students. She's contributed to modules across the programme and has begun to make a hugely positive impact. And she also has a great taste in music. Emily. Emily has published 3 collections of poetry: Conditional Perfect with Dura Press, In Between Angels and Animals for Ireland House, and No Vague Utopia for Anir Publishing. Conditional Perfect was included in the Irish Times roundup of the best new poetry of 2019. Emily Cullen.
Such an honour to be part of this thing of beauty, really, isn't it? It's just stunning. Helen Vendler, the American critic, said, "The ethical responsibility of the poet is emotional accuracy." And really, I was tapping into memory and desire, as Sarah so articulated beautifully there. And also, I was very moved by a poem by Edna St. Vincent Millay, "Time does not bring relief, you all have lied," who said that time would relieve me of my pain. I miss him in the weeping of the rain. So that line, "I miss him in the weeping of the rain," conjured up a lot of old feelings and memory and desire. And there was an ex who did have rheumatism when the rain was coming and things like that. But it was really emotional accuracy I was tapping into, and those feelings using the image of the rain. So this is In the Galway Rain. Rain is falling to be forgotten. Once it contained our longings. You thought the torrents romantic, pocking rocks by the vast Atlantic, but the downpours dissipated into nebulous vapours we inclined to blame for every little thing that went wrong. Here we always accuse the rain, shrug, proclaim that it all comes down to seasonal showers. You sense a kind of rheumatic pain, then laugh it off, put it down to incipient precipitation. If I'd held you that day in the hail, we had everything to gain. But you're there as on a darkling plain. I curse the Galway rain. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I'm not sure whether there is a Jamesborough School of Poetry, but I'm particularly pleased to introduce a neighbour, John Liddy. John from Rathban is based in Madrid, is a long-established poet, and his Arias of Consolation is his latest collection. I had the honour of writing the foreword for that collection of writing, and it includes beautiful writing by John Liddy and drawings by John Shinners. It is really, really a collector's item for those of you interested in art and writing. John is now exploring the role of faith in today's world, dedicated to his cousin Anne Maguire for her gift of a year's subscription to the Magnificat. So, John Liddy.
I have 2 little anecdotal pieces before I begin to read. One was when I was 16 or 17, I remember asking my mother, "Ma'am, is April the cruelest month?" And she said, "Not at all. Isn't it the month of the resurrection? And weren't you born in April?" "Oh," said I, that sorted Elliot out for me. The other little anecdote I have is a little bit of background, small little piece of background to this poem, excerpt from What Else Is There. It all began, my cousin Anne sent me a year's subscription to the Magnificat. The Magnificat is an American Catholic publication, and the volumes mounted up every month, and I never looked at them, and I felt a little bit guilty. I needed to write to my aunt, my cousin, and say something to her about this. So I wrote her a letter thanking her for her generous gift, and I promised I would look at each one, and I did during the pandemic. And I started looking at them and going in, and I loved the art sections, and the pieces about the saints overwhelmed me. all those lives, details about the lives of the saints. And the piece is about writers, people like Graham Greene, and actors and directors, Frank Capra, and all sorts of people. Oscar Wilde, there was a very good article on Oscar Wilde. Anyway, I set out to write my response to Anne, and I ended up writing another long poem, not as long as the arias of Consolation, but quite long. And people will be thankful for that. But I'll read this little excerpt from it. From What Else Is There? Meditations for the Day. The mystery in every one of us, a darkness unexplained, a capacity to defy limits, difficulties to surpass, heights of ecstasy, depths of sorrow, only an invisible power can mend. That energy, another discovery, self-engendered, few can comprehend. How to combat the corrupt angel, known to us since we first walked the African plain. Soldiers of Nergal who do the bidding, relishing in decay, hunger, genocide, plague, and war. Seeds planted in receptive minds, capable of unimaginable terror against people since the concept of bonum took root in a stable or on elevated ground, fashioned by a sect, each with its own martyr and monk to lead us to luminescence, breaking the chain that yoked us, revelation that altered our inexact thinking as we observed rough beasts slouch towards Bethlehem to be born again. A dire warning by the poet to avouch for in his poem, a danger we ignored for too long, indifferent to the evil in our midst, the imminent threat, a realization that change is primeval, something we must make provision for, as with Copernicus and Kepler's vigor, provide the brain with vision that eradicates iniquity and obliquity, that allows for fruitful lives to prepare for the enlightenment of societies, a thaumaturgy for us to discover. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John. Our next reader is a novelist and short story writer and a poet. I consider him to be one of my best friends. We call each other horse when we text each other. He is, as they say in Nina, a sound man. Donal Ryan teaches, as you all know, creative writing here at the University of Limerick. The author of several phenomenal novels and short stories. He is going to read his poem, I Saw You, which was initially read on Sunday in Miscellany on RT Radio 1 on Christmas Day 2020. Donal.
You know, it's a lovely thing to say, and you are a great friend, a great man. And it's so happy to be a part of this, and it's such a beautiful thing actually that the broadsheet, I feel so bad that I'm reading from the phone, but I can't manage the broadsheet, it's too big. And I held it out because I've been this terrified doing a reading in about 10 years. I don't know why. I think it's because I'm masquerading as a poet, and I've a terrible dose of imposter syndrome, especially given that our wonderfully talented MA class are here, and there are such great poets in that class and in this room. So if I held the broadsheet out, I'd just be shaking like this, and I couldn't read words, it'd be awful. And my kids are here to be embarrassed, even more than they already are. So this is a poem called I Saw You, and it's based on a real person who I didn't know until after they had met their lonely end, on a street in Limerick on a cold December day. I saw you out of Clare Street, where the Abbey River ends, shouting your love at a swan. She sailed on. I saw the Christian Army march past your station and your cross. You laughed at their pale Mary held aloft. I saw you in the Ara Mountains, coming down as I was going up. The air is thin and pure up there, and so were you. I saw you kneeling on the ground before Christ the Redeemer, and you were crying all your sins. I heard you were an architect in someone else's life. I heard you had a daughter and a wife. I heard you died on Cruces Street on the eve of Christmas Eve and clogged the path for hours outside McDonald's. I see you now in a twist of white along the rim of a clutch of cans, 6 for a fiver. I remember your hands were always clean. You were baptized daily where the rivers meet. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Imelda Maguire grew up in Limerick and now lives in Donegal. Her third collection of poetry, 48 Fragments, was published just last Sunday, one of a number of publications published by Revival Press Limerick as part of April is Poetry Month. Her previous collections are Shout If You Want Me to Sing from Summer Palace Press and Serendipity, published in 2015 by Revival Press. Imelda.
Broadsheet, but it's all I've got. That better? Okay, thank you. Yeah. April, this is the third April round where I've been spending time communing with the tree that lives outside my front door, basically. She's a hornbeam and she and I have become very close. Communion. I have come to love this tree. She is my younger hornbeam sister. Though she is strong and tall, rooted as she has the freedom of the air and sky, turns her face so gladly to the evening sun, asks me, isn't it just a joyous thing to live like this, to have our seasons, especially this one, when all our leaves are fresh, when light falls through them and makes of us a thing of beauty. I have no heart to tell her that my seasons only advanced through one spring long ago, and yes, a glorious summer of dancing. And now, this autumn, where I sit in her shade, listening to her whistle song, her murmuring chant, await my winter, while she, my little sister, will turn the rounds of seasons, gaining in dignity, stand solid, await each coming year as a newborn, ready to delight once more, each time, in the burst of bud, the shiver of new leaves. Thank you.
So we have 2 more readings before we close. We have Kieran, Beville and Joe Slade. So I think I'll ask Joe to read first. Joe is a stalwart of the writing scene in Limerick and beyond, a poet and a painter, author of 6 collections of poetry and 2 chapbooks of poems. She was joint winner of the Michael Hartnett Poetry Prize in 2014. Her most recent collection, Cycles and Lost Monkeys, was published by Salmon Poetry in 2019. Her exhibition, Nostos, took place at the Courthouse Gallery, Ennistimon, in the beautiful County Clare, in 2020. Joe.
Thanks very much, Eoin, for inviting me to submit for the broadsheet. It's a real honour to be in it. And it's such a beautiful, beautiful thing to have. I'll treasure it. And I do remember lots of broadsheets back in the day. So this is a lovely reawakening of that. Thank you, Eoin, for inviting me. The poem I'm going to read, She Walked to the Lindens, is a poem that's actually dedicated to my niece who died in 2020, Louisa Donnelly. She was a graduate of this college. She did music here in UL. And it was a tragic death. She was mother of 3 small children and she died of multiple cancers. And this is one of a number of poems that I'm working on to remember her, because that is the one wonderful thing about poetry, that you can dedicate a poem and by so doing mention the person's name. And that name is always there, always in the book, written. So it is, a gift to be able to do that. So this is called She Walked to the Lindens. We have also, perhaps the Lindens are a very broad reference to Berlin, where she was born, and we have relations. So, She Walked to the Lindens in memory of Louisa Donnelly. She walked to the Lindens, dry dirt underfoot, like breadcrumbs. The earth feeding the sky, tending a forest of stars. In another book, noted the same colour of thought, deep crimson, scar words on the meadow page, backward through the meadow of flowers. Sudden in the lindens their green limbs, when she, my darling, my kin, face to face, turned back, walked backward through the meadow, backward through the years, children, the table laden, a dog, poor canine, crumbs like hail. Her skin crimson and mauve of winter. Moons collide, face to face, touching, archaic gestures, the lindens, the sadness of. Beside my bed, a pen, red words, ellipses, sketches, songs. Your warmth wilts the white lilies. Face to face at the summit, my kin, my darling, my ancient one. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. And we will now have Kieran Beville. Kieran is the author of Right Now, A Guide to Becoming a Writer, and 4 volumes of poetry. He has had a substantial number of articles and poems published in newspapers, journals and magazines. Beville mentors aspiring poets and has conducted editorial services for a publishing house. So, Kieran.
I'd like to echo what has already been said by thanking Eoin Devereux for including me in this fabulous production, and to be included with such great writers and such wonderful poems. I feel honoured and privileged. I'm going to read the poem that's included in the broadsheet. It's called The Lesson, and it recounts an experience that I had when I was a boy of, I think I was probably 11. I was in 6th class in St. Munchin's CBS, Christian Brother School in Hassett's Cross, and there was a new brother and he took 6th class, and I remember him as very cruel, and but really that's not the focus of the poem, as you will see. I dedicate it to Alfie Earls. I knew him as Bunter Earls at the time. when he got a girlfriend, he changed to Alfie, and he's the owner of Alfie's Bar in the city, and formerly Kennedy O'Brien's. And just another little note of interest about Alfie is that he was in the army, he served in the Lebanon, and he was a taxi driver. And because of his experience, his unique experience in security and in transport, he was Mick Jagger's chauffeur when the Rolling Stones played in Croke Park some years ago. So I dedicate this to Alfie, and it's called A Lesson. I need my glasses. I forget. I didn't have the textbook or a note to explain why I hadn't learned the poem. Silence punctuated with the rhythm of his cane, fear on the faces of my friends, hoping he wouldn't call their names. I still view that romantic composition through an angry lens, remembering how my hands were hot with pain, summoned every 15 minutes when the clock would chime. My best friend cried with rage as I struggled to get memory and tongue to rhyme. He mimed the words from an open page, but I looked away, afraid he might get caught. The master was so determined that I be taught a lesson in literary art that he beat each syllable of that verse into my brain. But the thing that I remember most is Alfie's open heart when I recite each stanza and refrain.
Thanks, Kieran. So we're going to finish with one last poem, and it's a new poem which I road tested last night at a reading in Limerick City. Before I read it, I want to thank Limerick Writers Centre, particularly Dominic Taylor and the team of people there at Revival Press for working on this project. And I've always had a very good working relationship with Revival Press. And as I mentioned last Sunday at the launch of Imelda Maguire's new collection, Dominic Taylor has led Revival Press and Limerick Writers Centre on not even a shoestring, right? And it is a really, really, really fantastic example of community publishing, community development in the broadest sense. It is open to all kinds of writers in terms of their ability and their aspirations and so on. I've been really struck not only by Dominic's stamina in the last number of years with Revival Press, but something really has struck out to me in the last couple of years. The production values, the design values that Revival Press are now producing are really second to none. And in particular, I want to pay tribute to Lotte Bender, who designed the broadsheet and who has done the design work for some beautiful publications for Revival Press. I had probably a 5-minute conversation with Lotte at a launch earlier in the year, and I gave her my basic idea, and I was talking about I want this to be a bit like a band poster that you'd frame, or I wanted it to work in a particular way, and we went back and forth, and it was going to be much smaller, and then it got larger, and and so I had a really, really great experience working with Lotte and working with Dominic at the Revival Press, and I learned new things. I learned about things like the bleed when something is being printed. I learned terms that I hadn't encountered before, and I just want to thank them for the work that they have done. So we're going to finish then, and this is a poem, as I said, I've just read it once before in public, and it's called Penny Boy. And my mother was a working class woman from the inner city of Limerick, and a disparaging remark she might pass about somebody. If you were upset about somebody who had offended you, she'd say, Jesus, don't mind him, he's only a penny boy. And not to be paid attention to. And the poem is about class, and it's about coming from a particular kind of background and the way in which you are perceived. At first, my untutored, lazy eye didn't even register the many clues scattered all over the greasy streets of this pig town. Shunted from the very start, our final destinations preordained by Christian brothers who rooted us to trades, labouring or the boat. Classes called after saints, harbingers of our final destinations. Patricks, Gerards, Nessans, Kevins, Malachys, Sennons. It was Big Jim and Johnny Rotten who helped me unlock the code. My class honoured the patron saint of the falsely accused, but that didn't stop the dandruff and chalk-flecked teachers promising to follow our careers through ankle, or better still, the courts. There were further hints beyond the high walls of the school. Fragrant Laurel Hill girls, the well-turned-out daughters of the new moneyed, who wouldn't dream of telling their mothers precisely where we hailed from. Or the mohair-suited manager who turned down my softly spoken job application to work as a penny boy in the Harrods of Limerick, saying that they couldn't have the likes of me knocking around the finest emporium in town. And for all the guff about doctors and dockers singing from the one hymn sheet, the great and the decent indelibly marked us like the children of Cain. The stain placed upon us was far deeper than an Indian ink dot. We were forever judged by estate, by street, by accent. Thank you.